idea is really productive and has a lot of potential for further commentary and further work.
Well, that brings us to a recent paper of yours on the famous two cultures, and tell us a little bit about that, because if ever there was a bridging kind of a paper, uh, it's that brings in evolution actually in a number of ways. It would be that one. So give us a little synopsis of what you were trying to accomplish in that paper.
Well, that idea emerged when from conversations I had with Ted Slingerland I met him at a conference down here in San Diego actually, and I had just started poking around in, I don't know if you know the work of Bernard Crespi and Badcock, Christopher Badcock, Bernard Crespi. One is a biologist and a sociologist, and they were trying to expand on certain ideas in Baron Cohen's work on autism. And instead of, as you know, in Simon Baron-Cohen, in his most recent work, he talks about empathizing and systemizing as two different. And he wants to. Well, his main hypothesis is that, or the main claim is that autism is an example of the extreme male brain. And in Crespi and Badcock's work, I liked that they sort of expanded this dichotomy between systemizing thought I'm sorry, systemizing and empathizing thought. They expanded it rather to say, well, mentalistic versus mechanistic.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really useful, and it immediately sort of intuitively struck me that, well, this is a great way to redescribe or reframe C.P. Snow's old debate about literary intellectuals at one end of the spectrum and physical scientists at the other, and there's this
But you
gulf.
know, I have to break in here, and especially listening to you, you're a very analytic person, and it seems to me that the arts themselves are going to be divided into a kind of an analytic um, uh, version and a more intuitive version. Does that strike true to you, or?
Yeah, the
You
analytical.
sound to me quite a lot like a physicist somehow.
Well, maybe it's, I constantly have to practice it. I mean, there's always things that the physical scientists say that, on maybe the first time I hear it, I may not get it right away, but I have to work at it. It doesn't come quite as intuitively, maybe, as some of the, maybe thinking metaphorically or
Okay,
poetically. And
okay.
so, um, uh, but I mentioned that I think in a footnote in the paper that people who, in general, people who are more towards the mentalistic end of the spectrum are probably less mechanistic and vice versa, but you will find exceptions. I think Nabokov famously said the precision of the artist and the passion of the scientist. Meaning that, trying to reverse the old schema, and he was talking about, well, no, actually scientists are quite passionate, and artists have to be quite analytical when it comes to the fine-grained detail. And that was another thing I noticed when I was, among the evolutionists, and I do when I speak with people who are clearly talented in the physical sciences, that they are definitely thinking at a level of, I mean, I have in one of my papers, I have this aerial metaphor. One thing, the scientific worldview maybe is analogous to a low resolution satellite in orbit, that it's looking down at the coastline and can see the coastline, whereas the humanist or the artist is standing on the shore looking at minute grains of sand, and we get so absorbed in the details. I mean, in literary criticism, in music, musicology, or any of the arts, really, we are looking at a level of very fine-grained detail. And so we're looking at, why did Mozart choose this note as opposed to that note? Why did Shakespeare choose this word as opposed to that word? And so it's the way he said it and not just what he said, that's important to us. And so from that perspective, when you're looking at that level of detail, you almost disregard the satellite that's above you in space. It's that the satellite that's way above you in space is looking down saying, look, the coastline goes that way. And those of us who are looking at the grains of sand, sometimes we're in danger of starting to doubt the existence of the satellite. No, there's no coastline there. There's only infinite grains of sand. And I think Jonathan Gottschall cites this analogy. He has it from another, I can't remember who it was, a biblical scholar, but But I find it a very apt analogy for why the two perspectives have had so many differences. It's often a question of grain, of fine grain
Uh,
versus generality.
but I think there's a lot of differences cross-cutting themselves here in terms of mechanistic and metaphorical and fine-grained and coarse-grained forests and trees, so on and so forth. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find all those distinctions in all endeavors, but with average differences as well. And by the way, I hope these names that you're tossing off here, which will be unfamiliar to some of our listeners now, I would like them to become household words in
Uh-huh.
in the future because they represent such interesting positions, and I think that this deserves to be basically occupy center stage in intellectual discourse, and that's happening to some extent now. But I'd like to think that evolution, this view of life, accelerates that, and so that because these are interesting for um, everyone. Well, that's been a great starting interview. Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
Yeah, I think I got off on a tangent there. I just very quickly I wanted to answer your question about the paper. The main hypothesis was that it is possible that there may be a spectrum of cognitive abilities roughly looking like a bell curve, and depending on various factors, some genetic, some possibly epigenetic, we as individuals could tip one way or the other. Some of us are more towards the so-called mentalistic end of the spectrum, meaning these theory of mind abilities, meaning the social intelligence types of abilities, and others of us tip more towards the mechanistic end of the spectrum. And these will probably be the people who are naturally drawn towards the physical sciences. So what I try to do in that paper there is to say that there is possibly a genetic and biopsychological component to some of these differences that we observe, and it's not just a cultural difference between
Right.
poets and physicists.
Well,
So.
it's a biocultural difference, and actually, you propose a hypothesis in that paper, and we might be in a position to test that hypothesis, and that's worth mentioning here because it shows you how the arts, which seems as far away from culture as from science as you can possibly be, actually can provide very specific scientific hypotheses. In this case, you propose that some work by Jamie Pennebaker, the health psychologist at the University of Texas, on the health effects of keeping journals, basically, that we might expect individual differences, and that health effect would accrue mostly to the non-mechanistic thinkers. And we're in the position of doing this kind of research in the context of our Evolution for Everyone class, a large lecture class in which we do experiments in the class. And I believe that we were already going to do a Pennebaker kind of an experiment, and simply by measuring the thinking styles of the students, then we'll be able to perhaps test that particular interaction that you predict in your essay.
That would be great. That would be great because I would be very interested to see, yeah, if we had it. I know that there's already this, an autism quotient test, and that and a quantifiable test for finding people, normal, highly functioning people who tip towards that end of the spectrum. If we had a similar version of it for the other end of the spectrum, and then to test whether people who are more towards that mentalistic end respond more positively towards being given a chance to narrativize their own lives. That would be very interesting to see that result. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, this is what we can look forward to exploring in Evolution, This View of Life. And for the moment, I will sign off. And thank you so much for lending your time and your talent to serving as editor for the arts section.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to it.
Okay, bye-bye.